Guess what? Guess what? Everything I said so far was
Yeah.
muted.
Oh, okay. Okay. So to
So
redo then.
and we're live. So this is like quite
Okay.
embarrassing.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. All right. Let's do this again. Hang on one second. Let me.
Yeah.
We have. Okay. So I'm going to go back and repeat everything. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad. I'm the founding director of the Middle East and Studies program at George Mason University and associate professor at the Shard School, also at George Mason. And I am more than delighted to welcome Professor Muriam Haleh Davis, who is not just the author of the recent remarkable book, Markets of Civilization, and we'll talk more about it and her bio, but also has been a tremendous contributor to the political economy summer institute that is held at George Mason, usually when it's not online because of COVID, and has a number of other accomplishments under her belt, which we will also hopefully discuss. And before we move forward, let me just say that this event is co sponsored by the Shar School, the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason, and by the Abu Sulaiman Center for Global Islamic Studies, as well as the Arab Studies Institute. Muriam, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm caffeinating and just boosted, so
Oh,
managing to
oh my
stay
God.
awake.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
be caffeinating as well throughout.
And yeah, I'm
Let's.
delighted to be here. The Arab Studies Institute and Jadaliya have been such important hubs, including the political economy summer schools. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I was very excited. I've been watching, as you know, so much of your work over the past several years, and now this book is the like a wonderful crown. We will be discussing it at length, but before we start, let me just share the bio, which I'm never comfortable with because the bio says very little sometimes about a
That's
person,
fine.
except that we do have to actually share it. If you allow me, Muriam Haleh Davis is associate professor in the Department of History at UC Santa Cruz. Her recent book, Markets of Civilization, Islam and Racial Capitalism in Algeria, was published by Duke University Press in September 2022, like right now. She has also co edited North Africa and the Making of Europe, Governance, Institutions, and Culture, which was published by Bloomsbury Press in 2018. She published in a Journal of Modern Intellectual History, Middle East Critique, the Journal of Contemporary History, Lateral, and 20A21 or 20, 20 et 20, 21,
Voilà, c'est ça.
Revue d'Histoire. Ya salam. She has also authored pieces of for Al Jazeera English public books and Truth Out. She is on the editorial board of MERIP, the Middle East Research and Information Project, and works with the Maghrib page, is co-editor of the Maghrib page at Jadaliya. So welcome again, Muriam, and we are
Thank you.
delighted. So are a lot of people that are watching this that have been telling me that they are very excited and looking forward to it. And those who actually are not able to join us, absolutely can go back to the Facebook feed on the Middle East and Islamic Studies program, as well as the Facebook feed on Jadaliya, as well as the YouTube feed on Jadaliya, and the Twitter feed on Jadaliya to watch this again. And we will be releasing it as a video soon as well. Muriam, we are
Great.
really looking forward to this discussion and would like to start with asking you, of course, a question about the content of the book. But before we get there, I would like to ask you about how did the idea come about, and whether it was something that you envisioned to be what ended up becoming the book, or was it a number of other things that culminated in this particular volume?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I've been working on this book for probably 15 years now, so it's been a long road. And the idea came to me from various discussions I was having. I did my master's at Georgetown and kind of discovered questions of settler colonialism through Palestine. Um, and then thought about settler colonialism in a broader way and just got really interested with Algeria as a kind of case study or another place where there had been European settlement that dispossessed local folks. So Algeria kind of came to me through that training. And at the same time, I went on from Georgetown to study, to start a master's program in cultural theory and critical theory at the University of California, Irvine, where the theoretical apparatus kind of came into being. And at that moment, there was a lot of post-colonial studies out there, a lot of people reading Homi Bhabha, Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak. And at the same time that I was totally, taken aback and inspired by these works, I was also wondering, like, what happened to political economy and all of this? I was also reading some Marxist theory on the side. And so I was thinking, is there a way we could use the tools of post-colonial studies to think about the economy and to think about economic orthodoxies? And I think that's kind of the intellectual question that led me to the book. And the dissertation was very much focused on decolonization and the late colonial period. The book has a bit of a wider arc.
Thank you. Thanks, Muriam, for this. And before we start, I'd like to share that we will be going for about 30 to 35 minutes. And we will then open the floor for questions. People can ask questions on the Facebook feed for Jadaliya or the Middle Eastern Islamic Studies program, and potentially on YouTube. I am not sure. We have not done that before on YouTube, but people can try. And if they do, I will also relay the questions to Muriam. All right, so let's delve right into this. I am looking forward to a broad discussion, and I'm hoping that people can also tune in to learn more about this sort of combination of topics that are encapsulated even just by the title. Let me start by asking you about the about one of the central claims of the book, which is basically that the French created a racial regime of religion in Algeria. Can you explain what this means and how it helps us understand the story you've been trying to tell or you're telling?
Yeah, thank you for that. The notion of a racial regime of religion is articulated with Brenna Bundar's work as well. She talks about a racial regime of property. And one of the things I really struggled with in the dissertation was that clearly Islam was central to my story. The mechanism by which Algerian indigenous communities are excluded from the state, are excluded from capital accumulation, is through the marker of Islam as a legal category. For those who don't know the history of Algeria, I won't get into details, but in order, for example, to become a French citizen, one had to renounce Islamic civil law. So there's a very clear way where personal status law and Islam are the crux of the exclusion of the settler colony. At the same time, and this came about through lots of discussions I was having in France, they said, well, this is about religion. This is not about race. And I am a scholar of critical race theory. That's my training. And so I was trying to kind of figure out a way to communicate how religion operates in the Algerian settler colony. And one of the things that I think ended up happening through that discussion was a realization that it's not just in Algeria, but that in many cases, the line between religion and race is very porous. And perhaps, we know this from works on anti-Semitism. We can think about this in terms of the British conquest of Ireland. There are lots of other places that we could think about this with. But the racial regime of religion as a term is trying to get at the work that religion and legal categories does in the settler colony of Algeria. So that's kind of the theoretical apparatus that I hope helps me say, yeah, it's not always, religion is not always race. There's certainly we shouldn't go that far, but there are circumstances in which states use religious belonging to structure exclusions and dispossession. And so that's what I'm trying to get through with that term. I hope that's helpful. I don't want to get too into the theory weeds.
No, I mean, this
It's
is
9:15 in the morning here in California, so thanks for those who are listening. But yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with that term, is to give some people some tools to grapple with a question that I was grappling with, which is how do we think about religion and race together?
no, absolutely. No, this is a lot and plenty, and we will actually be unpacking some things that you have shared. Okay, so the book straddles the French colonial period, but also the years following 1962, after Algeria became independent. And contrary to many expectations, I presume you actually stress the continuities across this period rather than the ruptures. Can you unpack this for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And, by no means do I want to diminish or put into question the fact that the Algerian Revolution was a revolution and that politically this is a world making, to use Adam Getachu's phrase, event that was incredibly radical in nature. But the book, and perhaps I'll just give a little bit about what the book is trying to do concretely. I try to think about how ideas about Islam shaped the political economy of Algeria in the colonial period, but also in the post colonial period. So, I kind of trace different economic development plans and different reforms to show how planners and technocrats and also government officials are thinking about Islam as they are putting into practice economic policy. So, one of the ways I do this in the book is to show how, for many in the French state who are, these kind of modernizing planners, they assume that Islam is against what is needed for a market economy, that there's something about Muslims that they don't have the capacities or aptitudes needed to create or participate in a market economy. And even in people, for people on the left, like Pierre Bourdieu, for people who know, that work, there are also people on the left who also have a kind of version of this. So this is the assumption that many colonial planners are working with in the 1950s, that Islam is somehow inherently opposed to market societies because of the mental structures and family commitments and collectivities that are ingrained in the religion. And what I show is how, after independence, the Algerian state also sees Islam as something that has to be accounted for in putting into place economic policy. But the formulation, as you might imagine, changes dramatically. So now, rather than Islam being a break to economic development, Islam becomes necessarily compatible with socialism. And the, specifically Algerian socialism that's promoted by the first president Ahmed Ben Bella is rooted in a notion of the Algerian culture and personality and national self, but also Islam. So you have people coming out and saying, no, it's not that we're inherently incapable of participating in a market economy, it's that we are inherently socialist subjects because of our Islamic religion. So in both cases, there's assumed to be something that is inherent in Islam that's important for economic policy. And so that those are the continuities that I mention. And perhaps I'll just also say that when you're dealing with the Herculean task of creating the Algerian state, when all of the people who've been running the economy, schools, hospitals, the government are leaving en masse and have been part of the European community, it's a really difficult challenge. And so the Algerian state, in things like agriculture, have no choice really but to work with the institutions and notions of expertise and social scientific knowledge that have been left by the colonial state. And so, for me, that's really interesting because, of course, Algeria is this incredibly revolutionary moment with worldwide significance. At the same time, the notion of a kind of clean break or finding something that's outside of modernity, to think about this in perhaps contemporary, decolonial language is really difficult. That even the most radical thinkers of this period are navigating multiple bodies of thought, but they're certainly not able to create something kind of ex nihilo from nothing. They're still working within the languages of the French state, even if it's to overturn that or to reject the central premises.
Thanks, Muriam. I promise myself not to say thank you every time I do a conversation. Um, I'm engaged in a conversation. I keep saying thank you to people responding to my
I think it's
questions. And
lovely.
is it
I
nice?
think it's very nice to be thanked. Yeah, we all
Oh,
want to be appreciated.
oh my God.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
so
thank away.
I'm not gonna worry about it then. All right, let's do that. So I will not say thank you. Oh no, I will say thank you. Oh wait a minute. Yeah. I think the previous person said you don't have to say thank you. All right. So
Yeah, okay.
um, a lot of people who are listening or who are following uh, are interested in nationalism in the Middle East and North Africa. and they, I'm assuming, also focus the reading on the fifth chapter of yours, where you talk about the specificity of Algerian nationalism and its relationship with other pan-Arab movements such as Baathism in Syria and Iraq. How does thinking about the history of pan-Arabism and Arab nationalism from Algeria change our understanding of the topic? This is not, you know, I mean, in some areas, not intuitive, given,
Right.
given what is often called the heart of Arabism is like in Syria and maybe Egypt during Nasser. So, can
Yeah.
you shed some light on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is the chapter that I think perhaps in some ways brings us um, new archival material in that, I did Arabic language research at AUB in some of the student activist, student Ba'ath Party events that they were putting on for Algeria. And I was also reading some of the Ba'ath Party materials coming out of Syria and Iraq. And I think for many people who've worked on Algeria in this kind of internationalist or pan-Arab capacity, those sources haven't really been looked at. So this was something that I was, really happy to be able to do. But it's curious because there are all of these discussions on the kind of pan-Arab left, if we want to call that, about what Algeria is. And so, as Fadi Beldawil and others have shown, Algeria is hugely important for kind of pan-Arab thought. This is the moment, kind of anti-colonial struggle that many people across the region are watching and invested in and have real emotional ties to. But there is a question about on what basis one would consider Algeria part of a pan-Arab sphere, precisely because Arabism had been less prominent in Algeria, both because linguistically the French, really destroyed the Arabic language. So, Ben Bella himself, his ability to speak modern standard Arabic is more or less inexistent. So, how are you integrated into Pan-Arabism when you have that kind of destruction of culture? But also in Algeria, you have right, you have lots of Amazigh people who don't consider themselves Arab first and foremost, right? So Islam becomes a way to integrate many different communities into a national community after 1962, but Arabism isn't always the vein in which they do so, is what I argue, and I understand this is a controversial argument, but I look at publications like Al Adab and other political leftist orientations that are saying, why is Algeria Arab? How do we consider Algeria alongside of places like Lebanon or Syria or Iraq? And there's a lot of disagreement around that. So, even though we think about Ben Bella and Nasser as having this really rich relationship, and in some ways there was a lot of Egyptian help during the Algerian Revolution, it was always a very uneasy one as well, given Algeria's both place in the Arab world, but also its own specificities historically, linguistically, and even in terms of the kinds of people who have been living there over the last 100, 200 years, or going all the way back. And of course, there's lots of things that one could also say about the Jewish community, but I'll leave that perhaps for another time.
All right. I'm trying to remember if you want me to say thank you or if you don't want me to say. I realize. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mariam, for
I'm
this.
thinking.
Uh, so, what I'd like to ask you about is the pedagogic aspect of this book, teaching this book. As you probably know, we're very interested in making resources available uh, to educators in the classrooms. And my question is, what kind of classes you think this book will be taught in, and which chapters would you assign for various topics, and the extent to which the book is, the word might be a bit too much, but accessible to both undergrads and grads. And if you can tell us just a little bit about these matters, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I really hope that the book is accessible to undergrads. It's certainly not a beach read. I wouldn't give it to my aunts to read over a weekend. But I do think that parts of it in particular would be useful for teaching in an undergraduate classroom, particularly the first chapter, where I really give a kind of synthetic overview of the political economy of Algeria, even going back to the Ottoman period, right up through World War One, and I show how ideas about Algerians and about Islam play a role at different moments. And of course, the political economy of Algeria is changing at many different periods of the empire, but nevertheless, I argue that we can think about Islam as an element in everything that kind of that in many discussions, at least around the economy. And so I think as a kind of introduction to what is the political economy of a settler colony, look like how does the economy play a role in these myths around race and religion? I think the first chapter is perhaps the most accessible. And then, I also think that the middle chapters are perhaps a little bit more theoretical, but for grad students interested, for example, in questions of market economies and commodities, in the second chapter, I look at, oh, wow, we have my table of contents. This is very exciting. Thank you. I'm forgetting which chapter. Yeah, the second chapter, A New Algeria Rising, has a large discussion about wine and olive oil as two commodities that need to be modernized and standardized, and how notions of Muslim aptitudes or European aptitudes plays a role in this, because of course wine is a historically European product and olive oil is mostly produced by Algerian Muslims or by Algerians. The third chapter, I look at decolonization and the Constantine Plan. The Constantine Plan is this kind of wildly ambitious development plan introduced by Charles de Gaulle during the Algerian Revolution. And that chapter, I think, is very useful for thinking about the Algerian War and European integration together. So I show how a lot of the same assumptions and techniques of planning that are used in European integration are also put into place in Algeria. And it has perhaps my favorite quote from the book, which is when one of my planners says that thanks to the Constantine Plan, Homo Islamicus will be turned into Homo economicus. And these two figures kind of fascinated me, Homo Islamicus on the one hand, and all the Orientalist baggage around that figure, and it being used as a foil for something called, Homo economicus, which, we think about in terms of Adam Smith or discussions on neoliberalism. So this quote, I wanted to be the title of the book, From Homo Islamicus to Homo economicus, but it's a mouthful. And I think my editors quite rightly said, that's a terrible title, don't do that. Then from there, I'm really interested in rural reforms around agriculture. The fourth chapter looks at the question of the fallah and who is the fallah in Algeria and how do they get romanticized by the Algerian nationalists, but also how do the French social sciences make sense of the fallah as a peasant, right? Like, are these categories commensurate or not? And then the book goes into kind of, the question of Arab nationalism, Islam, and self-management. Algeria also attracts all these third worldists, Europeans as well, people like Michel Raptis, better known as Pablo, who come to help Ben Bella get autogestion or self-management off the ground. And they have their own understanding of Islam and the economy and revolution. And so that's what I get into with the last chapter, in chapter 6, is not only the kind of radical Trotskyists who come, but also the kind of international development cooperation folks, right, who are also starting to descend on Algeria as a place for international economic development. So that's kind of the arc of the book. And yeah, I think that there are things, in it. I think the heart of the book is probably the third chapter. So for graduate students, who want to think about market economies, race, religion, during decolonization, I would probably point them to chapter 3.
Absolutely. So let me ask you if, given that the book which I have, I'll be honest, I couldn't get through the whole thing before this interview because you
That's
were so
fine.
gracious and you said yes, and then you said Monday, and I was like, oh my
I'm
god. So,
sorry.
but
I'm traveling tomorrow, so thank you for doing this
no,
so last minute.
we're very grateful that you were able to make it. But I've read enough of it, and I have seen you operate in various public settings and otherwise. To know that you actually pull together several strands based on various legacies, social theoretic and otherwise. So you're addressing colonialism, you're addressing capitalism, you're addressing race, you're addressing religion, you're addressing everything about Algeria. Not just the history of Algeria, but also the contemporary developments, which, as some might know if they are following what we do, um, I have conducted a few interviews with you actually about what has been happening in Algeria in the context of the protests in the past 2 or 3 years. Um, so if someone wants to read up
Mhm.
uh, on any of these topics, any of these dimensions, um, is there something that they would need to take a look at before getting to this book, or is there something that would help understand what is going on in the manner in which you bring things together? You bring this constellation of social theoretic trajectories and legacies. Um, or
Yeah, that's a great question.
are there
Yeah.
people that you recommend people people read? I know that in the Political Economy Summer Institute, um, you've addressed a number of authors addressing racial capitalism, for instance.
Hmm.
And I mean, it was fascinating to hear you at that time address those matters. But you can either discuss books or people that you think would be good either as accompaniments or background.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. It's interesting to think about the field of racial capitalism as it is right now, and kind of what that means. And, it's in the title of the book. But for me, racial capitalism is really a discussion about race and the economy, that wants to go further than just saying that certain groups suffer the worst edges of capitalism based on their religious or racial identity or something like that. Right? There's a notion that we can talk about race and capitalism, as race helps have access to cheap labor, or does helps function in capitalism, which is a little bit different than the discussion of racial capitalism, which tries to think about how capitalism itself is theorized through notions of human difference and extractive practices on different kinds of human bodies. But it's not, for those people who have read Cedric Robinson, who is the most widely cited person, I'd say, in Black Marxism. I always have graduate students who say, I thought there'd be a theory of racial capitalism, and there's not. There's a kind of constellation of really wonderful works and tools to think with. And so, I think that Robin Kelly's article, I think it's in Boston Review, what did Cedric Robinson mean by racial capitalism, is a wonderful primer. And then what I try to do from there is think, well, what does that look like in the Mediterranean? Because many of these discussions have been focused on the Atlantic world. And what does it mean when it's not necessarily, skin color, but rather religion, when is the operative category? So I'm trying to kind of play with this conceptual universe, but that's where I'd go for folks who just kind of want to cut their teeth on racial capitalism. In terms of this scholarship on Algeria, there's so much exciting work and so many brilliant colleagues who are writing on Algeria from a number of angles right now. Donald Hassett, Arthur Assaraf, Malika Rahal. I mean, I could go on and on. And but I think the best kind of historical overview is James McDougall's A History of Algeria. I think it's a magistral kind of overview of different periods of Algerian history. So for people who just feel like they maybe don't quite have the historical background. Having said that, I try really hard in the book to not assume prior knowledge of Algerian history or politics. I try to give a lot of context and to kind of hold the reader's hands, because I'm hoping that people from different fields read the book who are not specialists in Algerian history. So, those are the two. For the Hirak, I will plug the Jadaliya Maghreb page. We've had some essential reading posts about Algeria. We've had some great coverage and analysis of the Hirak by lots of different people. So that's also, I think, a good resource. But the Hirak and the protests really just come up in my epilogue, where I'm thinking about how figures like Malik Ben Nabi are taken up in the Hirak and through different kinds of political dynamics at work in those protests.
Wonderful. So can I ask you to do something odd, which is basically try to connect, if this is at all possible, the implications of what you address in the book to the more contemporary history of Algeria? Uh, is the distance too vast for us to make any connections, or can we see some vestiges of the effect of that era today?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to overstate
Yeah.
the effects and how they continue, but certainly um, the ways in which many of Algerian technocracy is still one of the main feeders of the regime, for example. And so you can see what one of my interests is on kind of technocrats and state planning and how they are reading the social sciences. And so certainly there's an arc that one could follow there. There's also an arc, I think, to think about language and the Arabic language and Islam, that one could also kind of think with. But I wouldn't say that there's a kind of one-to-one correspondence. I touch on the Civil War a little bit in the conclusion, really to say that this notion that sometimes we have about the Civil War being kind of a neat division of two sides or a war of languages, is very oversimplified to what the intellectual discussions actually were. So I think that there are some ways to reflect on the contemporary moment, but the book itself really ends in 1965. However, I think for also people in Middle Eastern studies who see Algeria as both really fundamental to many things happening in the region because of the revolution, perhaps even because of the Civil War, and yet kind of want to understand better the specificity of Algeria and perhaps the Maghreb in general. The book helps do that, without collapsing Algeria into Middle Eastern studies, where the people who are, I think, often trained in Middle Eastern studies come away with a really, a focus on Palestine, on Egypt, maybe on the Levant, perhaps more and more the Gulf now. But it's the Maghreb has long been a little bit marginal to those conversations. So I hope I hope that I'm helping unpack some of that as well for scholars.
Thank you. I would like to also ask about in the past, I mean, maybe 10 years, 15 years, or although there's no number, uh, we seem to be learning more about the Maghrib, or at least seeing more knowledge production about the Maghrib in a way that, at least to my knowledge, in the 1990s, there was a gap between the knowledge
Mm-hmm.
produced on the Mashriq and Egypt, as opposed to the Maghrib. Is this first of all, do you see more knowledge production yourself on the Maghrib compared to before, or is it just because I am getting more and more interested in this, not least because of my own work and my engagement with Jadaliya? And is this a trend expanding? Does it have to do with the Arab uprisings? And because there's a sad thing whereby we joke about how people don't know very much about the Middle East in the United States, uh, and then we can mention North Africa and Algeria and the Maghreb, or Morocco and so on. But then a lot of people in the
Mm-hmm.
Arab world don't know as much, like in the Mashriq, of the eastern part of the Arab world, also don't know. I mean, to an
Sure.
extent, that much. So is this changing, and why?
I do think the scholarship, there's, like I mentioned, there's so much wonderful work being done on Algeria in particular and the Maghreb in general. And I think, the scholarship on the Maghreb has historically been torn between people trained in French history and people trained in Middle Eastern history. And I would say it was quite possible, and still is, in France and in some quarters to work on Algeria and not speak Arabic, for example, to not be trained in Arabic. And so that creates a kind of, cottage industry within French studies or within French Empire, where it makes sense that those people are reading and interested in North Africa. Absolutely. But those are quite different questions than the ones posed if you're coming at the region from Middle East studies. You're asking a different set of questions, you're reading a different set of sources. And of course, hopefully that has to do with languages as well. So I do think that has really evolved in that the hegemony of French studies over the Maghreb is no longer the case, and Mesa is the home, I think, of most people who work on the Maghreb to a certain extent. In terms of kind of the misunderstandings or projections of people from, between the Mashriq and the Maghreb, Algerian Twitter is hilarious. I would, there are lots of jokes about kind of, I went to Egypt and somebody thought I only spoke French because I'm Algerian. There is a linguistic and historical set of questions that emerge in the Maghreb that are different than the rest of the region. And so, I'll just put it there. I think that it's not surprising. It's nobody's being malintentioned here. It's just, often people not having that much contact or thinking that, um, all Algerians only speak French or something like that. But these are caricatures and stories that you see on social media or by talking to folks that are kind of the most extreme. The anecdote that one wants to tell at a dinner party. I don't think they get at the reality of the situation.
Thank you, Muriam. I have a couple quick questions, and one of them is: do you want to say something or plug the lexicon uh, that you worked on regarding the Hirak movement? As it is one
Yeah,
of the more
absolutely.
fascinating things that I've seen. It's very interesting, especially if you're interested in language as well.
Yeah, and it wasn't just me. There was a team of us working on that, but it's a kind of dictionary of different slogans that were being used in the Hirak, and also explaining them linguistically. A lot of them are coming from Darija, so explaining the Darija, which is very specific to Algeria. It's a mix of French, Spanish. It's a linguistic potpourri that way. And so what we tried to do is to explain not only the political significance of the slogan, but also to think a little bit about the languages in which this is being expressed.
Awesome. Um, well, before I let you go, I mean, we actually are not receiving tons of questions. So let me ask this: considering that you are also a football enthusiast, and we're talking about the real football, which is the football, the game you play or the sport you play with your feet, not handball. Um, with occasional kicks, which is what is called American football. I know I keep saying this. I'm not gonna get over it, and I will not say
It's,
the word that
I
starts with
think we
S.
can provincialize American football. I think that this
I
is
mean,
a worthy
yeah,
endeavor.
it's unbelievable, unbelievable how this happened. It's one of the miracles of the world, right? Anyway, so Algeria didn't make it to the
Yeah, very
World Cup.
sad.
What's going on? And is this a big thing in Algeria?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of moments of political and sporting disappointment in Algeria right now, and certainly this is one of them. And there have been a number of kind of footballistic, diplomatic issues with Morocco, including kind of the Juniors Cup final that happened a few weeks ago. So, I do think Algerians are going to rally behind Morocco or Tunisia or both. There will be a pan Maghreb, despite all the diplomatic mess of the region right now. Absolutely, I don't want to. I was just came back from Tunis and Insaniat. I picked up my Tunisia jersey. No ill intention for any Morocco people out there. I just wasn't in Morocco, so I couldn't get a jersey. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see how the current political conjecture in the Maghreb plays out through the World Cup, where Morocco and Tunisia qualified, and unfortunately the Fennec did not.
Okay, well, Thank you. I know that we will be talking about this going forward. So I look forward
I
to
look
that.
forward to it.
And so before we let you go, unless we get a barrage of questions, I'd like to ask you about what's next in terms of your work and your research, and where do you go from here? Given that this is, I mean, I think this is a monumental work, and I don't know
Thank you.
anybody that knows your work who's not looking to learn more about it or to see where you're going next and what you're up to next. So, is there a
That's
glimpse
very
of what's
kind.
coming next?
Yeah, there's glimpse is the right word, I think. I've been trying to start a second project on the discipline of sociology in Algeria after independence. So I think one of the things that the book does is think about the social sciences and how does the social sciences, like how do they structure the way we think about the world, right? The discipline of economic planning, the discipline of anthropology. And so I'm really interested in that discussion now after Algerian independence. So starting in 1962, and there are lots of reasons why sociology is fascinating for me as a discipline. The Algerian state really bans anthropology as a colonial endeavor in the 1970s, and so sociology comes to be the kind of state-making revolutionary discussions. And so I'm interested in that. I'm also starting to think about Algeria Pakistan connections. I'm of South Asian origin. I always promised I would never work on South Asia. I would never work on my own empire. So I guess I'm seeing a bit of the return of the repressed and, sharpening my Urdu skills and seeing what Algeria and Pakistan, had in common and conversations be, among the two regions. So, but this is all very much in the future.
Absolutely. And why don't you wouldn't talk about these other topics?
Um, in terms of South Asia,
Yeah.
it was something in grad school where people just assumed that if you were South Asian, you were going to work on South Asia. And I didn't want to work on South Asia. I didn't want to have to, go through my own family's. It was too close to home, perhaps. I didn't want to start talking about the British colonization with family, or, I was interested in the Middle East. I was speaking Arabic much better than I was speaking Urdu at the time. So I wanted the kind of freedom to choose academic subject that wasn't my own family history. And some people are doing wonderful work on auto theory and on studying their own family backgrounds, which is fantastic as well. I just, I wasn't ready perhaps back then. So we'll see where that goes.
I actually thought it was had something to do with the actual topic and the country and so on and the history, because I will never work on where I'm from,
Yeah.
and but for different reasons, and that is because, well, it's Lebanon.
Mm.
Because I feel bad for people who do, because it's really, it's a, I mean, the word mess is a severe understatement. And
Yeah.
yeah, you think you got it, and you think you got it, and you
Right.
did get it, but you kind of didn't.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I understand that. Okay,
Yeah.
well, Muriam, you've been very generous, and I really, really appreciate you sharing with us all of this about your book, and we do hope to speak with you again. But before I let you go, there's a very quick question, which is kind of broad, by
Hmm.
Kyle Anderson, who
Yeah. Hi,
says
Kyle.
uh, he or they would love to hear more about chapter 4. So if you can say a couple words, and
Yeah.
then I promise we will let you go so you can continue your life.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that question. So, one of the things that I look at in chapter 4 is all of the questions of land reform and agricultural modernization. And the the framing mechanism of this is how are people thinking about the fallah, as I already mentioned. And there's an entire debate whether the French fallah can be compared to the French paysan or peasant. And what you see is that the fallah comes to operate as a kind of civilizational category rather than an economic one, right? So it's not necessarily how many hectares of land or a certain kind of subsistence economy. It's really about the kind of cultural mores of the fellah. And so, in addition to that, the chapter looks at attempts to introduce private property and land ownership among rural Algerians, of course, in the context of a very violent war. So, this attempt, folks out there might know the Eugene Weber transforming peasants into Frenchmen. And so the phrase I'm playing with, the fellah into peasants, is transforming the Algerian fellah into a French paysan or peasant. And what is the imagined distance culturally, and what kind of aptitudes and capacities would they need to be able to do that? So yeah, that's chapter 4. And of course, the question of security and war and mobility is really also at the heart of that chapter. So, the recruitment centers, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much again, Muriam, for this and for your entire conversation and the work that you've done and your contributions to this very important topic, which actually brings together a lot of other topics, which is why I really enjoyed reading it. It is so non-linear, and in terms of the various strands that you actually address. And I urge everyone to get a copy from Stanford University Press. There is a link.
Duke University
Oh,
Press.
oops. Nope, nope.
Not
Duke
from
University.
Stanford,
I
yeah.
actually
With
just
all due
typed.
respect to Stanford, yeah.
We just
It's
typed
publishing
this
lots of great stuff.
in the Jadalia announcement. So from Duke University Press, although Stanford also has really good books, uh,
Exactly.
and we have a link in the Jadalia post, and we will actually repost this as a video, as an edited video, where you can also click on the link to get a copy of Professor Davis's Markets of Civilization. Thanks again,
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Bassam.
and
Good to
we
see
will
you.
we will see you soon. I'm sure.
Yeah, see you in
Have a
Denver.
have a wonderful
Inshallah.
day.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care.